June 30th, 2003 began like any other day in the quiet town of Dalkeith, located in Midlothian, Scotland. It was a peaceful place where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen, until 10 p.m. when the family of a young girl launched a desperate search. She had gone out, as was her habit, to meet her boyfriend in a nearby forest but failed to return half an hour later. The young man soon joined the search efforts, appearing eager to help the family find her. Yet the situation took a swift and unsettling turn. Almost as if he knew exactly where to go, he led them directly to a location, a gap in a stone wall bordering a section known as Roan's Dyke Path. The boy climbed through it and without hesitation discovered the lifeless body of his girlfriend. The cold and detached way in which he looked at the girl disturbed everyone present. Good evening and welcome to Tale Tracks. Luke Mitchell was born on July 24, 1988 in Scotland. He was the youngest of two siblings. His early childhood was relatively harmonious until, at the age of 11, his parents divorced. Luke then moved with his mother to a neighborhood on the outskirts of Dalkeith in Corstorphine, New Battle. Thanks to a stable financial situation, they adjusted well to their new environment. Luke began attending St. David's, a Catholic school where he was known for being extremely well-mannered. After school, he served as an army cadet and enjoyed a wide range of hobbies. He practiced horse riding, played music, and rode motorcycles. However, his demeanor and appearance changed dramatically upon entering adolescence. He began dressing in a gothic style and let his hair grow long. He also developed an intense fascination with Satanism and with musician Marilyn Manson. His teachers quickly noticed a change in his behavior and academic performance. One teacher even confided in the school counselor, expressing concern about the violence and satanic themes that permeated his writing. In one essay, he wrote, "People like you need people like me, satanic people, to maintain balance." In another, he stated, "Just because I'm more violent than others and self-harm doesn't mean some stupid teacher should send me to a psychiatrist. Choosing to follow Satan's teachings doesn't mean I need psychiatric help." By the time he turned 14, Luke was spending most of his time consuming large quantities of cannabis, either during or after school. He frequently got into trouble and was known for fighting with classmates. On one occasion, he told a fellow student that he could easily imagine himself high and murdering someone. He even showed the student a knife, explaining he knew the most effective way to cut someone's throat. That same year, he met a girl at school, and their connection was immediate. Her name was Jodi Jones. Jodi had been born in 1989 in Scotland, the youngest of three children of James and Judith Jones. Unlike Luke, her family struggled financially as both parents worked for Royal Mail. Despite this, Jodi was a bright and thoughtful child from a young age, excelling in both painting and poetry. However, her life took a tragic turn at the age of 10, when her father took his own life. The event plunged the family into a deep emotional crisis. Judith had to quit her job to care for her children, and overwhelmed, she sent the eldest daughter Janine to live with their grandmother in Mayfield for a time. This separation was particularly painful for Jodi, who was extremely close to her older sister. As a result, she began self-harming and drastically altered her appearance, wearing mostly black and dyeing her hair in shades ranging from green to pink. By the time she turned 14, Jodi was already a devoted fan of heavy metal and had begun engaging in increasingly risky behavior. It was in February 2003 that she met Luke Mitchell, an encounter that would mark the final step in her transformation. Upon beginning a relationship with him, her first serious one, she was introduced to intimacy, drugs, and alcohol. The pair frequently smoked within school grounds, often accompanied by a shared group of rebellious friends. They appeared to be deeply in love, or at least, that's how it seemed. That spring, Jodi confided in her diary, "I think I'm in love with Luke, not in the usual way. I mean real love. God, I think I'd die if he wanted to break up with me. When I cry, he hugs me and strokes my face. He's so sweet. No matter what he says, I believe him." However, there was something Jodi didn't know. Luke was also involved with another girl. Additionally, he had a bizarrely close relationship with his mother. They even shared a bedroom. Deep down, Jodi seemed to understand that Luke was not a positive influence, which is why she kept their relationship a secret from most of her family. The only one she confided in was her older sister Janine, her loyal confidant. Worried by what she learned, Janine informed their mother about the situation. In May 2003, Jodi was finally required to introduce Luke to her family. The meeting went relatively smoothly, and in the following weeks Jodi and Luke continued to meet frequently at their usual spot, a narrow, secluded path through a wooded area known as Roan's Dyke Path. The trail was dark, lined with old stone walls, and familiar to them both. But everything changed when Judith, Jodi's mother, discovered that her daughter had begun using substances with her boyfriend. Convinced that Luke was a harmful influence, she forbade Jodi from seeing him again. After much pleading, however, on June 30th, Judith reluctantly lifted the punishment, unaware that this decision would lead to consequences far more devastating than her daughter's heartache. That day, Jodi told her family she would meet Luke at 5 p.m. in their usual spot, the forest path in Dalkeith. She set out along the familiar shortcut between the neighborhood where she lived and New Battle, where Luke resided. Since her phone was broken, she asked her stepfather, Alan Owens, to send Luke a message letting him know she was on her way. By 10 p.m., her family realized she hadn't returned. Janine, along with her boyfriend Stephen Kelly and their grandmother Alice, went out to search for her. Around 10:30 p.m., Luke encountered them and offered to help, bringing along his German shepherd Mia. He told them Jodi had never shown up and that he would take them to the spot where they usually met. He led them directly to a gap in the wall bordering Roan's Dyke. The opening, shaped like a U, was well known to him. Without hesitation, Luke climbed through and immediately found Jodi's body. She was dead, completely covered in blood and partially undressed. Her hands had been bound behind her back using her own trousers. She had been stabbed multiple times. What shocked everyone was Luke's complete lack of emotion upon seeing his girlfriend's lifeless body, while the others around him began to cry and scream in horror. Shortly after Jodi's family called the police, Luke was taken in for questioning. He claimed he had only said she didn't meet him because there were many possible reasons why she might not have shown up, and insisted he wasn't particularly worried. His response struck investigators as odd, given the couple's intense relationship and routine. According to the victim's mother, the two always met at the same place and Jodi had never missed a date. Luke's story began to unravel further when he claimed he didn't even know Jodi's punishment had been lifted, despite having received the stepfather's message that she was on her way to meet him. Suspicion deepened when Luke accurately described everything Jodi had been wearing that day, even pointing out a unique hair clip she had on. This level of detail made little sense. He had supposedly only seen her in the dark after discovering her bloodied body. When questioned about how he had found her so easily, Luke stated that his dog was trained to track scents and that she had stopped at the U-shaped notch in the wall, prompting him to climb through. Family members of Jodi who were present at the time asserted that Luke went directly to the V-shaped gap in the wall without being led there by his dog. Furthermore, they reported that upon seeing her body, he appeared not distraught but rather disturbed and intensely angry, as if indignant about the discovery itself. Yet there was something that gave investigators pause, something that made them consider the possibility that Luke might not be the perpetrator. His fingernails were dirty, and he appeared unkempt, as though he hadn't bathed in some time. It seemed peculiar that someone who had just committed such a brutal murder would show no trace of blood, and if that wasn't enough, Luke had an alibi. He claimed that while his girlfriend was being murdered, he had been at home preparing dinner with his mother, Corinne. Both she and her other son confirmed this account in a later interview, leaving police with more doubts than answers. As the investigation continued, the forensic results arrived. Jodi's body bore a total of 20 stab wounds, to her head, chest, cheeks, mouth, ears, abdomen, and neck. The wound to her neck was so deep it nearly decapitated her. These findings allowed investigators to reconstruct Jodi's final moments. The evidence suggests that an altercation took place first, followed by blunt force trauma. She was then strangled until she lost consciousness. Once she collapsed to the ground, the assailant proceeded to stab her repeatedly with a sharp instrument until she died. But the brutality didn't end there. The attacker inflicted further wounds post-mortem, mutilating her with such rage that Jodi was left without eyelids and missing clumps of hair. It was clear that this was a crime committed with a disturbing level of cruelty. Despite the extensive injuries, forensic experts found no signs of sexual assault. This, combined with the absence of defensive wounds, led them to suspect that the killer was someone Jodi knew and trusted, most likely someone she wasn't afraid of. Investigators theorized that the murder occurred during an argument that escalated into a sudden, explosive outburst of rage. Suspicion around Luke continued to grow. Then came a key discovery. Carved into a nearby tree were the initials LM and JJ, Luke Mitchell and Jodi Jones. Near the body, police also found dozens of footprints and a condom containing fresh DNA. When tested, the DNA matched a man named James Falconer, but he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. The shirt Jodi had been wearing at the time of her death contained DNA from Stephen, Janine's boyfriend. However, this wasn't deemed significant, as the shirt actually belonged to Janine, who had lent it to her sister that day. Both Jodi's bra and trousers, however, contained genetic material from Luke. Still, given their ongoing relationship, this was not considered unusual or damning. Perhaps most notably, none of the blood found on or around Jodi's body matched Luke's DNA. In total, 122 items were collected from the crime scene, yet efforts to extract usable DNA profiles from them were unsuccessful. Despite this, investigators remained convinced from the moment Jodi's body was discovered that Luke was the sole suspect. To that end, police executed a search of his bedroom. What they found raised even more concern. There was a collection of bottles filled with urine and a CD, The Golden Age of Grotesque by Marilyn Manson. They also found another video, a surrealist short film by Manson titled Doppelhers, which had been purchased 2 days after Jodi's death. The film was graphically violent. Despite his girlfriend's recent and horrific murder, Luke appeared drawn to disturbing, violent content. Investigators also discovered a watercolor painting by Manson depicting Elizabeth Short, the actress known posthumously as the Black Dahlia, who was the victim of a famously gruesome and unsolved murder. The painting depicted Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia, a woman murdered in the 1940s. Luke had acquired the artwork 2 days after the crime, and disturbingly, there were certain similarities between Jodi's injuries and those of Short. Meanwhile, in one of Luke's schoolbooks, investigators found a disturbing phrase scribbled in his handwriting: "I've tasted the green blood of the demon." However, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence came in the form of a knife sheath, engraved with 666 JJ 1989-2003, the birth and death years of Jodi Jones, alongside the phrase, "The best day I ever had was when tomorrow never came." This lyric is from a Nirvana song, one of Luke's favorite bands. Yet despite the ominous inscriptions and associations, no traces of Jodi's blood were found on the sheath in Luke's room or anywhere else in the house, nor was there any blood detected on his clothing. Still, investigators remained convinced that Luke's mother had helped him cover up the crime, providing him with an alibi and burning the clothes he had worn that night in the garden fire pit behind their home. This theory gained traction when neighbors reported having smelled burning wood between 6:30 p.m. and 10:00 p.m. on the night of Jodi's murder. Corinne responded by saying she had been burning pampas grass. However, when detectives examined the ashes, they found nothing of forensic value. But the same witnesses had more to say. Several claimed to have seen Luke returning to his house at around 10:00 p.m., just moments before he joined Jodi's relatives in the search. Police quickly speculated that he had been returning from disposing of the murder weapon. 2 months after the crime, Luke attempted to return to school. However, he was ordered to stay away from other students, as everyone at school suspected him. He refused to comply with the restrictions, and school authorities suspended him. When Jodi's funeral took place, the Jones family made it explicitly clear that Luke was not welcome. The police shared this view. The gothic teenager who idolized Satan and had introduced Jodi to drugs and sex was now their prime suspect. 10 months after the murder, Luke Mitchell was arrested and formally charged with the crime. Although both the prosecution and defense chose not to use the DNA found on Jodi's clothing as evidence against him, they did have one critical piece of information: the Baiga jacket Luke was known to wear constantly. Multiple acquaintances testified that he had been wearing it on the night of the murder, but afterward, the jacket seemingly vanished. When questioned about the missing knife and jacket, Luke refused to provide any explanation. His mother later told police that she had bought him a new coat, identical to the one described by witnesses, and claimed the old one never existed. Strangely, she had also replaced his knife, giving him a new one 5 months after the murder, as a Christmas present. At this point, suspicion extended not only to Luke but also to his mother. And then there was the most damning fact of all. Luke knew exactly where the body was, and had led Jodi's family directly to it. Even more unsettling was that, according to those present, he was able to identify her body in the darkness of a dense forest. As if that weren't enough, new witnesses came forward. One of them claimed to have seen 2 people, matching the appearance of Luke and Jodi, at the eastern edge of the woods around 4:50 p.m. that day. 2 other witnesses would later report that they had also seen Luke in the area. The sighting occurred at the far end of New Battle, approximately 50 minutes later, directly contradicting Luke's alibi that claimed he was at home preparing dinner. Additionally, a woman reported seeing someone who strongly resembled Luke near the crime scene that same day. The man was wearing a hip-length khaki green fishing jacket. Another witness, a woman named Andrina Bryson, stated that she saw a couple, closely resembling Jodi and Luke, as she was driving near the entrance to Dalkeith Country Park. Just minutes before the crime took place, when shown photographs by the police, Bryson identified the accused. She noted that the young man was wearing a fishing-style jacket with a noticeable bulge in one of the pockets, a detail that matched the coat known to belong to Luke and which several other witnesses had seen him wearing that day. The girl, whom she saw from behind, had her hair tied back. Bryson felt almost certain she had seen the couple arguing before concluding the investigation. The police uncovered another crucial detail from Luke's phone records. He had made a call to a speaking clock service at 4:54 p.m. That call cast further doubt on his alibi. If he had truly been at home, he could have simply checked the wall clock. There would have been no reason to call for the time. When asked about this during questioning, Luke chose to remain silent. In addition to the murder charge, Luke was also charged with carrying a knife in public, including at St. David's High School, and with the supply of cannabis. The trial was held at the High Court of Justiciary in Edinburgh. From the beginning, Luke pleaded not guilty and refused to testify. Photographs of the crime scene and video footage were presented to the jury. Photographer Alan Murray testified that one of the wounds extended from the corner of Jodi's mouth to her right ear. A clear indication, he said, of a deliberate and calculated act. The prosecution emphasized once again how suspicious it was that Luke had so easily identified the exact location of Jodi's body. To help the jury assess the plausibility of this, a scale model of the crime scene was constructed and displayed beneath the Parliament Hall where the trial was taking place. Jurors were also taken to the actual site where the body was found. Later, during further questioning, Luke reiterated his original alibi, claiming he had been at home. However, his brother Shane provided a conflicting account. Shane admitted that Luke had been watching explicit adult material in his bedroom at the time of the murder, something he typically did only when he was alone at home. Forensic analysis of the family's computer confirmed this activity. Corinne, their mother, was not present and therefore unable to support Luke's alibi. Both Luke and Corinne had lied. Shane went on to confess that he had initially backed his brother's story but later disclosed that he and his mother had discussed what to say to the police in the days following Jodi's death. With that revelation, the defense narrative collapsed. As a result of her false testimony, Corinne Mitchell was charged with perjury for attempting to fabricate an alibi for her son. The prosecution continued to dismantle her credibility, noting that she had allegedly been present when Luke had a skull tattooed on his body, an image that would soon take on new significance. In October 2003, Luke made phone calls while falsely claiming to be 18 years old. By that time, everyone around him was convinced that the relationship between Luke and his mother was deeply unhealthy. Moreover, it was confirmed by both Luke and others that his cannabis consumption had increased significantly after the murder. Clearly, as a means of escaping reality, one particularly critical testimony came from Kimberly Thompson, Luke's other girlfriend. She stated that they had planned a 2-week trip together. At the time, she had no idea he was seeing someone else, and only learned about Jodi's existence after seeing news reports of her body being discovered. Upon hearing this, the prosecution suggested a new possible motive, that on the day of the murder, Luke may have confessed to Jodi that he had another girlfriend, or perhaps Jodi discovered it herself and confronted him. Sparking the conflict that ended in her death, Luke denied having spoken to Kimberly in months. However, this was quickly disproven. Phone records showed that he had called her regularly, including just hours after his final sexual encounter with Jodi, which occurred 2 days before the murder. Another suspicious remark surfaced during the trial. A witness testified that on the night of the murder, Luke said Jodi wouldn't be going out that evening. A strange statement, considering her family had already told him she had left to meet him. It raised the chilling possibility that Luke had said this because he already knew she was dead. Despite the mounting evidence against Luke, something unexpected occurred during a later hearing. A woman who had testified 18 months earlier that she'd seen 2 teenagers arguing in the park was no longer certain that one of them was Luke. This raised the possibility that someone else resembling Luke had been in the area that day. But the trial continued, and police chose not to pursue this lead. Nevertheless, more conflicting witness statements emerged. Several individuals claimed to have seen 2 young people near the forest at 5:15 p.m. beside the stone wall. They also recalled seeing bicycles propped against that same wall, though they never saw the pair again. The police had issued a call for anyone present in the area between 5 p.m. and 2 a.m. on June 30th to come forward. It took 5 days for two young men to do so, Dickie and John Ferris, cousins of Jodi. They were questioned as witnesses, not suspects. Yet neither could clearly remember what they had done during the critical hours when the murder occurred. Luke's defense attorney directly asked the cousins whether they had killed Jodi, a question both vehemently denied. Even in the absence of a confession, a murder weapon, or definitive forensic evidence, the jury was convinced they had heard enough. All indications pointed to Luke as the sole perpetrator of his girlfriend's murder. On January 21, 2005, after 42 days of trial, a record duration for a single defendant case in Scotland, the proceedings concluded. Following 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Luke Mitchell guilty of Jodi Jones's murder. He was also convicted of carrying knives in public and of encouraging and supplying cannabis to fellow students. Judge Nimmo Smith addressed him directly with stern words. "It is beyond my ability to peer into the black depths of your mind. I can only judge you by what you have done. You have been convicted of a truly evil murder, one of the most horrific crimes any of us can recall, and you will be remembered as a wicked individual." The judge also noted Luke's complete lack of emotion throughout the trial, suggesting that this emotional detachment might signal a tendency to harm others without remorse. On February 11th, Luke was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison before being eligible for parole. The young man remained impassive as the verdict was read. That same day, the perjury charge against his mother was formally dropped. In the aftermath of the trial, Luke gave several interviews, in which he once again proclaimed his innocence. Insisting that all the evidence, Luke consistently maintained that the evidence presented against him was purely circumstantial, and that no direct forensic link had ever been established between him and the murder of his girlfriend. The case attracted such intense media coverage that Marilyn Manson himself commented publicly. When asked whether he believed his music had influenced Luke, the singer instead blamed Luke's upbringing, stating that it had everything to do with his lifestyle and environment. In the years following his imprisonment, Luke continued to assert his innocence. In July 2012, his legal team submitted a 300-page report in an attempt to have the conviction reviewed. 2 years later, the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission determined that police had violated Luke's human rights by questioning him without the presence of legal counsel. However, the commission also concluded that this procedural breach had no bearing on the core evidence used to convict him. As such, Luke was not deemed a victim of judicial error, and there was no reason to question the verdict. Although the defense threatened to escalate the case to the European Court of Human Rights, they had already missed the legal deadline for appeal. That same year, both Luke and his mother accepted a media outlet's offer to undergo polygraph tests, which they passed on camera. The case returned to the headlines, prompting renowned criminologist David Wilson to remark that he feared Jodi's true killer may never have been caught. Still, these developments failed to trigger a reopening of the case. UK courts did not accept polygraph results as legally reliable due to their lack of 100% accuracy. However, the renewed attention did have an impact. Public opinion began to shift, and an increasing number of people began to believe that Luke might have been wrongfully convicted, and that a dangerous killer could still be at large. In 2015, a man digging near the area where Jodi's body had been discovered unearthed a kitchen knife with a wooden handle. Buried in the ground, using tongs, he placed the knife into a bag and turned it in to police. The officer's response was unequivocal. The case was closed, and they had no intention of analyzing the knife. Detective Inspector Susan Cho, a member of the homicide team, stated that all relevant evidence gathered during the initial investigation had already been properly analyzed from a forensic standpoint. Meanwhile, Luke's situation continued to deteriorate. In 2019, a GoFundMe campaign aimed at raising money for his legal defense was rejected by the platform. In July 2021, Luke was transferred from a maximum security prison to a medium security facility, signaling that he was getting closer to becoming eligible for parole. There was even talk of allowing community visits and temporary leave to visit his mother, but old habits resurfaced. During 2 random drug tests, Luke tested positive, derailing his progress. As a result, he would have to wait 3 more years to reapply for early release, and all plans for supervised community visits were canceled. He had effectively returned to square one. Still, Luke refused to give up. He blamed the positive test results on a treatment he had been receiving in prison. Jodi's family, however, remained unconvinced and even relieved. They believed none of his claims and stated clearly that they did not want a murderer walking freely through their community. In a parallel development, private investigators John Sense and Michael Neal identified another potential suspect, a man named Mark Kane. Kane was known for consuming a variety of substances and, according to witnesses, habitually carried a knife. He had attended New Battle Ivy College, which is located in Dalkeith, near the site where Jodi's body was found. Kane had no alibi for the time of the crime and bore a resemblance to Luke, leading investigators to speculate that the person identified by an earlier witness might have been Kane, not Luke. In the days following the murder, several people noticed that Kane had scratches on his face. When questioned about them, he claimed he had fallen into some bushes. However, the judiciary did not recognize this line of investigation as valid, and the alleged new suspect passed away in 2020. If he had indeed been the one who murdered Jodi, he took that secret to the grave. Still, there were those who believed Luke was not guilty and were determined to share their version of the story with the world. In 2021, Channel 5 in the United Kingdom aired a documentary titled Murder in a Small Town, which raised a critical question. Had the detectives erred by focusing solely on the victim's boyfriend? Forensic scientist Sarah Gomez, appearing on camera, expressed her confusion over the lack of definitive evidence such as DNA. Whether Luke was guilty or not, the head of the Forensic Institute, Alan Jameson, remarked that it was highly unusual for there to be no scientific evidence, particularly given the amount of blood present on Jodi's body at the crime scene. That wasn't all. Private investigators revealed a new detail that had never before been made public. There was a primary suspect they believed fit the case far better than Luke. However, due to legal constraints, they were unable to name him. Speaking from prison, Luke stated that he had been targeted simply for being a weird guy, and that the police never made a real effort to pursue other suspects. Corinne, his mother, reiterated that her son had been at home cooking at the time of the murder, a statement criticized by many viewers, who pointed out that her other son had contradicted this claim during the trial. Lastly, the documentary implied that certain members of Jodi's own family may have been involved in a cover-up. The theory concerning Jodi's cousins, who had been questioned during the trial, gained renewed attention. Many viewers who accepted the film's version of events began targeting the family online, adding further controversy to an already divisive case. To this day, 21 years after her daughter's murder, Jodi remains steadfast in her belief that the verdict was correct and maintains that the case against Luke was always strong. She says the documentary and the support groups advocating for Luke, many of which are fundraising in his name, cause her immense pain. She refuses to see her daughter's memory used as a tool to free her killer, and even suggests that defending criminals has become some sort of fashionable ideology. She finds no comfort in the way the media treats Luke as if he were a celebrity, stating that it only serves to inflate his ego. If things continue this way, she believes her daughter will never truly rest in peace. Meanwhile, Corinne still lives in Dalkeith, despite the fact that many neighbors look at her with suspicion. She insists there is no reason to leave, that neither she nor her son did anything wrong, and believes that media pressure and public opinion caused the trial to end prematurely. She remains convinced that in time the truth will come to light. In 2025, Luke, then 37 years old, will become eligible for release. But even after serving his sentence, it's likely that the questions surrounding this case will persist. If you found tonight's case compelling and informative, I kindly ask you to leave a like or share a comment. I bid you good night, but not without first thanking you for your continued support. And remember, if you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to do so and become part of this ever-growing community.